Well, good morning. This is Plant Smart Living with Farmer Fred. Really glad you could join me today out here in the vegetable garden. Boy, it's a beautiful day here today. It's the first week of August and nice low humidity. You know, those kind of great days for working out in the garden. Well, anyhow, you know, I get a lot of viewers commenting and they say that my garden is like the Garden of Eden, you know. And so today's video, I thought I would show you how you can, in 8 steps, create your own private backyard paradise. So thanks for joining me today out here in the vegetable garden. That's one thing we all have in common as human beings is stress or anxiety or even frustrations in our lives, you know, and so that's why I just love having a garden retreat here in my backyard, a place I can just step away from all the busyness of life, all the anxiety and frustrations, and just have a nice place to meditate and to dwell on, you know, pleasant thoughts and so on. And so the garden is a great retreat, you know, being close to nature and all of its beauty is a wonderful thing. So these 8 steps to creating your own private backyard paradise, I'm going to cover today in today's video. Number 1 is location. Number 2 is soil. Number 3 is walking paths. Number 4, boulders. Number 5 will cover raised beds and pots. Number 6, garden trellises and arbors. Number 7 is fountains, and number 8 is flowers and plants. And as I go through these different steps, I'm also going to take you through my garden, showing you some of the things I've created, you know, and you know, my backyard garden, it's been there 3 years, where I have my 4-foot by 32-foot raised garden beds. But you know, your own private backyard paradise is something you can create over a period of time. You know, it all depends on the size of your yard. So anyhow, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about location. And so, you know, if depending on the size of your property, you know, you may live in a townhouse or have a nice sized backyard. You know, you can really apply all of these principles, or just some of them, depending on where you live or the size of your yard. But anyhow, as far as location goes, as far as orientation to the sun, now most of my plants here and flowers get full sun, and so, you know, that's really important for you to consider. You know, you want to take some time, go out in your backyard, or even if you were going to create this in your front yard, you know, but observe the sun, you know, see where the sun rises, see where it sets, see how much sun is in certain areas, you know, because, for instance, this is a sun gold cherry tomato growing up my trellis here. Well, they like a good 6 to 8 hours of sun, as well as all your melons and peppers. Your flowers, like I'm using here in my garden, they get full sun. They like full sun. You know, lilies and other plants can require partial shade. And so you do want to take some time and observe your area where you're going to be installing or planting these in your garden. Step number 2 would be your existing soil conditions. You know, whether you need to amend your existing soil or raise your beds up, you know, you would have to determine that. You could always get a shovel and go out back and dig into your existing soil and see whether it's mostly clay or rock, or whether you have 2, 3, 4 inches of topsoil. And so if you take a spade and dig down a foot, you can determine the condition of your soil. You could, if your soil's in pretty good shape, you can always amend your soil with, like peat moss or compost or grass clippings or shredded leaves. That's always a good way to amend your soil and add aeration to your soil. For instance, here in my gardens, I get anywhere from 5 to 10 yards of composted leaf mulch that's amended with topsoil. I get that every spring from barnside compost locally, and it's cheaper when you buy it by the bulk. But and then because the soil is everything. You want it to be fertile, rich in nutrients. You want it to have good drainage in your soil. Because the looser the soil is, the more your root system's going to reach far and wide, taking up more nutrients, and then also resulting in larger plants. And so you really want to consider what type of soil you're going to be planting all these plants in, because a nice garden, you want to be nice and lush. You want it to have a tropical look to it, and that's what I have here in my garden. You can grow different plants and flowers, so you have different colors and textures. Number 3 would be walking paths. You may want to have a garden or a path that leads out to your garden. And so there's options that you can use. You can use pavers, concrete pavers, or just some old brick. You could use crushed stone. You could use wood chips. You could use mulch. Over in my raised bed area, I have some red shale that I ended up bringing up from I have a creek down below, and so I put some red shale in between my raised garden beds. And so there's various options out there, and so you would have to choose your own personal preference. And so number 4 would be boulders. I have various boulders located throughout my garden. I've been on this property for over 30 years, and I have 10 acres here in Harleysville, but a long time ago I got 80 tons of boulders delivered from Rolling Rock quarries. And so those 80 tons I was able to distribute throughout my garden areas, and boulders can weigh anywhere from 100 to 300 pounds or more, so 80 tons sound like a lot of boulders, but you can use them up real quick. And I'm going to take you throughout my gardens, and I'll show you some of these areas where I have my boulders. But boulders add a beautiful texture to your garden. They add a sense of age to your garden. And you can also get some good looking boulders. You can get them online, or certain garden centers, you can get them in fiberglass today, so they're nice and light. And so boulders is another great addition you could add to your backyard garden paradise. Number 5, you could either use raised beds, as I mentioned earlier, or even some pots throughout your garden. And my wife loves growing her flowers in pots on our back patio in different areas, but pots add a real beauty to your garden area. You can grow flowers in your pots. You could also grow a lot of your vegetables in pots. And so again, raised beds are great if your existing soil is kind of rocky, where you have a lot of clay. And so that way, if you use raised bed, you can control what soil you're adding there in your existing area. Number 6 would be garden trellises and arbors. Right behind me is a trellis that I use, and I have trellises throughout the garden, and they just add a certain beauty to your garden. You could always locate a garden trellis or arbor as an entrance into your garden area, and that's what I have right here. I use this as an entrance. I also have some clematis vines growing up this, and some morning glory. And I'll take you throughout my garden and show you some of my different garden structure and some other arbors that I have. Number 7 would be fountains. You know, I just love my water fountains. I installed a small garden fountain over in one of my raised beds there last year. I did a video on how you could install that for under $65. You know, fountains just add they're so nice and pleasant to listen to. They add a little bit of grace, and they're also double as a bird bath. And but it's, you know, fountains can be very peaceful and therapeutic and relaxing, and that's the whole idea of gardening, you know, or having a garden, because, you know, today's schedules can be very busy and very hectic, and you know, we all have a lot of stress in our lives sometimes, and so it's nice to be able to have a garden that we can all retreat to. And so having a fountain also is add some beauty to your garden and elegance. I also have a fountain at my pond down there running right now that I built that out of a utility sump pump. Number 8 would be flowers and plants. And so, you know, throughout our flower gardens, we have a lot of zinnias planted, a lot of portulaca. I have some quite a few hibiscus plants, the Lord Baltimore, and a few other varieties. I have my Canna lilies, and also I use a lot of my elephant ear bulbs or elephant ear plants that I have a few of them throughout the garden, because again, you want your garden to look nice and lush. You almost want it overgrown in an organized way, and nice and tropical looking, and that's what the Canna lilies offer. That the elephant ears offer a lot of nice greenery, and the hibiscus plants, you know, they just add a nice punch of beautiful red color. So we've already talked about number 1, location, number 2, soil, and number 3, we've talked about walking paths. So why don't I just show you some of my walking paths. I have a stone walking path that it's going through a path leading down to our pond, and then over between my raised beds I do have some of that red shale. So let's go take a look at some of those areas. And so over here on the edge of our patio is where we have that stone path that leads down towards our backyard. I also have some boulders that are around the plants and the flowers. So let's take a closer look. So this is our stone path that we have that leads down towards our backyard, towards our pond. And it has a nice curve to it, or an arch to it, that adds some nice grace. But these add a nice, beautiful, natural looking addition to our garden. And number 4 on our list was boulders. And you can see how I also have boulders throughout our flower garden, and also other areas in our garden. And you know, anytime you plant boulders, you want to put them in groups of 3s or 5s. Even so with your plants, if you want your garden to look a natural, informal garden, you want to plant in odd numbers. 3s and 5s is always, or 7s, groupings or clusters. But the boulders just add a beautiful texture to the garden, a nice color and grace. And you want to heel your boulders in nice into the soil, you know, dig them in a little bit so they give a nice natural look, that they've been there for years. But they just add a really nice texture to the garden, and placing them around the flowers. I also have some boulders over there at the end of my garden structure, so let's go take a look at those. And you know, obviously everybody's backyard garden paradise is going to be different scale, you know, and even if it's a smaller area, you can still apply some of these principles to a smaller area. And or just take bits and pieces of these different steps and apply them. But anyhow, here on the end of my outdoor garden structure, I planted this beautiful elephant ear here. But you can see in the foreground, I planted or installed these boulders here along the front edge. And again, it just adds a real beautiful color and texture and a natural look to this garden here. And then I do have some flowers, vinca flowers planted here in the front. I also have some building stone that I use to edge some of these areas in between my raised bed areas. And the building stone again adds a nice natural look. You know, it adds a sense of age, also age to your garden. And so let's just take a closer look at that border there of stone. But you can see how it makes a nice natural border along here. And then I also have some up in this area over there. Holds back the gravel that's in between the raised beds. And so number 5 is raised beds and pots. You know, using those in your backyard garden retreat. And so behind me is where I have my raised beds. I have 4 raised beds, or 3 raised beds there that are 4 foot by 32 feet long, divided into 8-foot sections. And of course, that's all personal preference. You know, you can change and design your own shapes and sizes in your own backyard garden area. And so, you know, there's a lot of possibilities, but I do love having the raised beds here because you can control what's in the soil. And, you know, if you get heavy rains, you know, your beds are elevated, and so you won't drown out your plants. And so let's just take a closer look at some of my raised beds that I have here in the garden, and also some of the pots that we have here on our patios. And so I hope taking a look at some of those flower pots were able to give you some ideas for your backyard private paradise. So number 6 on the list is garden trellises and arbors. You know, one of my favorite things to talk about, but I just love my arbors and trellises in the garden. You know, there's something about walking under a trellis. You know, I just love that feeling, and especially if you have some nice lush greenery growing up your trellis, or you know, some indeterminate tomato plants are a wonderful thing to grow up the trellis. But anyhow, you can save so much space in your garden by growing up and growing vertical, you know. And this here is my garden structure. It's a multi-purpose structure here. I have my outdoor shower here that I just love using in the summer, because when I'm done working in the garden or mowing the lawn, I'm all dirty and sweaty, you know, and so I just hop into the shower. The water that feeds that is from my pond, and my pond is all spring-fed rainwater, and so it's nice, clean water. But I also have this prep table that I use a lot, especially when it comes to canning our tomatoes and all. We use that as a prep table, and it's nice to have a shaded trellis like this that you can also work under. And so let's just take a closer look now at some of my trellises that I have in the garden. So thanks for joining me today out here on this beautiful day here in August. So behind this door is where I have my outdoor shower here. Let me turn the switch on here. And so I just need to turn this valve on, and so there's my outdoor shower. Again, I just love having this thing, and you know, these garden structures are not that difficult to build, but it's just basic construction. As I mentioned earlier too, I have this outdoor workbench. It's 3 foot by 8 foot long, and it's a great prep table for out here in the garden. We like cleaning most of our vegetables before we bring them into the kitchen. And then underneath it I have this, like this 90-gallon storage container that I use water in there in the early spring that I pump out to water a lot of my vegetables, because of my main water lines are not hooked up yet. Otherwise they would freeze. But early in the season this tub works out really well. As I mentioned earlier, these garden trellises and arbors are just basic construction, you know, 2x4s, 2x6 construction, maybe 1x3s or 1x4s, and you know, it's good basic skills. You could always start with a small trellis and try building that, and then learn some skills, or have a friend or a neighbor help you. But anyhow, I have another garden trellis right up here, so follow me along. And so this is another arbor here, or trellis, that I really like. It's made out of simple 2x3 construction here, and I have 4 foot in between my raised beds here, and so I build it to span the raised bed. I also have a sweet million tomato plant growing up this. They're just finally starting to turn red so that I can eat them. It's one of my favorite things to do in the garden, is to walk around and eat my vegetables. But again, something really easy to build, and again, I just love walking under these. And so let me encourage you to think about, you know, building a few trellises in your garden. And what I also did is I stained these a dark brown, like a mocha brown, a color you'd often see in the state parks here in Pennsylvania. Let's just take a closer look at this trellis here. See, you're joining us today out in the garden. How you doing, boy? And so I angled this in A-frame pitch here, just something a little bit different, something to break up the monotony in the garden. And then here for the trellis pieces, this is like a piece of 3/4 inch by 1 inch board that I ripped down so the plants can grow up the ends. And then the birds love to land on the top here. I had a hawk one time land up there at the peak, but the birds do love coming and landing on these trellises, which is another exciting thing to watch. And again, this sweet million tomato plant is just growing real nice up this trellis. And so I just have one more trellis to show you, the one that I stand right in front of for most of my videos. So just go take a quick look at that one. And so this is the trellis that leads from our patio to our garden. You've seen that in many of my videos if you've watched them before. But again, simple construction, 2x4 construction. I added some curved brackets to my trellis, and you always want to try to add some arched or curved brackets. It adds some grace and some design element to the trellis. I also stain these white because it's a little bit more formal here right off of our patio. But again, just a nice vertical trellis. I have my sun gold cherry tomatoes growing up this. I have some morning glories here, and then we also have some clematis vines growing up this arbor. And so number 7 on our list is fountains. As you can see behind me, I have a fountain there running in my pond here. That's the pond that I use to water my garden with in my outdoor shower. I also constructed that fountain out of a utility pump for like $100. So it's an easy and inexpensive way to build a fountain for your pond. But anyhow, let's go look at the smaller, much smaller fountain up there at the end of one of my raised garden beds. And so right here in front of me at the end of my raised garden bed is this other fountain that I was talking about. As I mentioned earlier, I did a video last year on how you can build this for under $65. But again, it's a beautiful thing to have in your garden. You know, it's fountains, again, sound beautiful. They also work as a bird bath for your different birds in your area. And again, just very peaceful and relaxing and therapeutic to have in your garden. You can put a chair right next to your fountain. You know, also if you have a balcony at home, and at the balcony you can put a small fountain with just a couple nice lush plants to, you know, a smaller version of your backyard garden paradise. But again, you can scale your garden to any size you want. You just would need more or less plants. But let's take a closer look at this beautiful little garden fountain. And so number 8 on the list is flowers and plants. You know, that's what's really going to add a nice tropical, lush appearance to your garden, you know, along with some boulders or some nice pavers to walk on, or, you know, it's all going to bring the whole garden together in a nice natural look, a nice graceful look. But behind me, as you can see, I have these elephant ears. You know, one of my favorite plants to grow in the garden. In fact, what you do is here in Pennsylvania, Zone 6, after we get our first hard frost, I cut the leaves off and then store these in Tupperware containers down in the basement, store the bulbs. And you can actually divide the bulbs up year by year so you can have more of these nice green, lush plants in your garden. And so let me encourage you to think about growing these in your garden. You can get these bulbs at home centers or garden centers. You can even buy them online. But anyhow, you know, another nice plant that I grow in the garden adds a nice green look to it, nice lush look, is my Canna lilies. And so let's just go take a look at some of the Canna lilies. Another one of my favorites in the garden are these Canna lilies. They grow about anywhere from 3 to 4 feet tall, maybe a little bit taller, but you know, they love full sun, although they will tolerate partial shade, just like your elephant ears. But they add a nice vibrant red color to the garden, a piercing red. I call these my flames of fire. And I installed these along the edge of my property between the grass and the woods, kind of like a natural border. And also at the far end of my garden down there, I have 5 Canna lilies that I planted in a circle. So it's kind of like a bouquet of flowers. It's a real pop of color, you know, very vibrant, piercing red. And so let's just take a closer look at some of these Canna lilies. Another one of my favorite plants or flowers to grow in the garden are these hibiscus flowers or plants. You know, I have some, these are the pink variety. I also have the red variety, the Lord Baltimore hibiscus variety. And so they add a nice fullness to your garden. You know, what I also do too is you can wait till the end of the season at some of these home centers. And that's where I've bought a lot of my hibiscus plants and some other varieties. At the end of the season, you know, it's like 50 to 75% off. So, you know, that's a good little tip on how you can save a lot of money. All these hibiscus bushes I bought for like only a couple dollars a piece at the end of the season. So let's just take a little closer look at some of these beautiful flowers. And so let's talk a little bit more about flowers in your backyard garden retreat. You know, these here are zinnias that we planted throughout the garden. My wife loves to do the flowers, so she plants most of the flowers that you see in my videos, and I do most of the vegetables, you know. And but these are zinnias, are very hardy. In front of me are Stellador daylilies. As they get larger and wider, the mounds, you can split them up and divide them. You know, also another nice lush grass that you could put in your garden, they're called ornamental grasses. And you can buy them at the nurseries. They get 4 to 5 feet tall and a nice big lush color of grasses. You know, you can get them in striped versions or varieties. You can also, as they get larger, you can dig them up and divide them and spread them more in your garden. But, you know, we also have some portulaca in our garden bed here. We also have marigolds. I have some vinca over there next to my garden structure. And so different varieties in the garden that flower different times of the year. They also add different colors and textures to the garden. And so let's just take a little closer look at some of these beautiful flowers. Sunflowers are also another great addition to your backyard garden retreat because they're nice and lush, they're easy to grow, and they add a lot of nice fullness to the garden. This one here happens to be a volunteer plant. And of course you can grow vegetables in your backyard garden retreat. You know, I have tomatoes, peppers, melons, hot peppers, you know, all kinds of cucumbers. You know, another nice thing you can plant are greens. You know, Swiss chard is a not only edible green, but it's also an ornamental green. So that's another nice plant to grow in your backyard garden. But anyhow, I hope this video was able to give you some tips and ideas on how you can create your own private backyard garden paradise. It's always a fun video to do, to share some ideas with you. I've been gardening here on my property for quite a few years. You know, gardening's a big learning curve, and you certainly learn through all your trials and errors. If you have any questions or comments or ideas that you can add to this video, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. One thing I love about life is learning new things and ideas. And you can also visit us at plantsmartliving.com. And there you can learn more about gardening and also how you can reclaim your health by adopting a whole food, plant-based, vegan lifestyle. Well, anyhow, I hope you have a wonderful day today. So until next time, this is Plant Smart Living with Farmer Fred.